the inevitable, the irresponsible, the highly coveted win-loss predictions for the 2025 Philadelphia Eagles schedule coming your way on this Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to this Thursday edition of the show. I'm your host, as always, Louis DiBiase, continuing to recap the release of the Philadelphia Eagles 2025 schedule, which overall I think has a pretty good balance, a lot of breaks. The Eagles play 7 games this year where they have at least 8 to 10 days of rest. I think the bye week, week 9, is solid. Not a lot of gauntlet stretches in this season, kind of like there was with a first-place schedule of 2023. I think the start of the season is really, really difficult, going Dallas, Kansas City, Rams, Buccaneers. That's a tough first month of the season. The finish is tough too. Vegas, Washington, Buffalo, Washington. That's not easy, but overall, considering the Eagles were always going to have a tough-looking schedule on paper no matter what, as reigning Super Bowl champions, I think the NFL did about as good as I would have hoped, outside of the fact that there aren't a lot of Sunday games, lots of prime times, not any back-to-back home games for the Eagles, which I don't love, but overall, there's always something to gripe about with the schedule. I am a pretty big fan of what the NFL did. We got to do this, though, as we do every single year, and every single year I say the same thing about it. It's irresponsible. Everything's on paper. It's May 15th. There's a lot that can happen in these, 4 months until the regular season starts, until these games are played in October, November, December. Every year there's teams that exceed expectations, and every year there's teams that regress. With all that being said, we're going to do this malpractice anyway, because we all love to do it. We've been doing it since we were, 5 years old? I've really been doing this since we were a kid, instead of with all my podcast listeners. Back in the day, I would do it on the bus with my friends. The schedule would come out and you go, week 1, win. Week 2, loss. Week 3, win. Week 3 is always a win if you lose one of the first 2 games. Nobody ever has their team starting off at 1-2. But the win-loss predictions, a very popular thing. We got to do it on the show. It's a yearly tradition right here on Locked On Eagles. So let's go through my way too early, very irresponsible win-loss predictions for the Philadelphia Eagles 2025 schedule. Let's start with that gauntlet. Those first 4 games are really tough. I wouldn't call it a gauntlet, actually. I take that back. That's reserved for that 2023 stretch. That was really difficult. But I think the Eagles' toughest test this schedule is those first 4 games. Cowboys at home, Chiefs in Arrowhead, Rams at the Link, on the road against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we always know how those games in Tampa go, especially on a warm Sunday in September. That normally does not go well. So let me pull up my predictions here for the Philadelphia Eagles schedule. Week 1 at home against the Dallas Cowboys. I have this one as a win. The reigning Super Bowl champions are 15-5 in the last 20 games that open up the season. It's at home. The momentum, the vibes, celebrating that Lombardi trophy. You're playing your biggest rival in the Dallas Cowboys. I think there's no way the Eagles let the Cowboys come into Philadelphia and spoil their night, although they will finally play Dak Prescott for the first time in years. They did not play him in 2024. I still think Jalen Hurts is the better quarterback. I think the Eagles have the better roster. And normally the Super Bowl champs, they win that football game. Not always. The Detroit Lions beat the Chiefs last year, and, I think it's happened before. 15-5, so it's not 20-0 in the last 20 games like this. But overall, I think the Super Bowl champ normally wins. Even in 2018, when the Eagles' offense was so rusty and could not move the football, they still found a way to take down the Atlanta Falcons in a gritty last-second win, which was as nerve-wracking as the divisional round matchup was the year before. So I give that a win, and the Eagles are 1-0. Then they head on the road to Kansas City. I do think that's going to be a loss. I think the Chiefs are going to be very motivated to win that football game. The Eagles beat the Chiefs in Arrowhead in 2023. They beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl last year in New Orleans. Can they beat them 3 times in a row? I'm not so sure. I'll say this one's a loss, and the Eagles are 1-1 to start the year. Now, I think they got to get at least one more win in this stretch against the Rams and the Buccaneers. I think they're going to get both wins, though. I think they're going to start the season off 3-1. I think everybody's saying, will the Rams get the Eagles this time and it's not snowing? As if now the better team will be on an even playing field and they can take advantage, as if the Eagles won in a fluky way. I actually would argue the reason the game was close to begin with for the Rams, they were able to keep it close because it was snowing. So I find it weird that everybody's using this as a way to defend the Rams and give them credit instead of the Eagles. I feel like they're saying it was almost a fluky win because the Eagles were able to use the elements against the Rams, but I would say vice versa. I think the Eagles, on an even playing field, when it's warm out and it's talent versus talent, we saw what happened in that same situation last year, Eagles-Rams in LA, and the Eagles blew them out of the water on Sunday Night Football with a record-breaking night for Saquon Barkley. So I think they, as good as I think the Rams are, they're going to want revenge. I think they are the second best team in the NFC. I do think the Eagles take the Rams down, and this is a heart pick over a head pick. I don't feel good about this, but this time it's week 4 again. You're going to Tampa Bay. You got to right these wrongs of what's happened in that stadium. The Buccaneers always have the Eagles number, but I got to believe the Eagles finally get this done. They did win in Tampa Bay in 2023, week 4, so it's not like they never can get this done, or it was week 3 on Monday Night Football. But lately, it's just not been great. The majority of the time, things don't go well in Tampa. Not this time. The Eagles get to 3-1, and they take down the Buccaneers. So they are 3-1 in that really tough stretch. I think we would all take that for sure. I think if you can get above 2-2 in that stretch, that's ideal. So now, our next 4-game stretch before the bye week, at home against the Denver Broncos, on the road against the Giants, on the road against the Minnesota Vikings, and then at home again against the Giants. They play New York 2 of 3 matchups before the bye. So I do think they actually lose to the Denver Broncos. I feel like this could be a trap game, a come-down game after 3 really tough wins against Dallas, against the Rams, against the Buccaneers. I'm sure it's going to be a close game against the Chiefs. The Broncos are a solid football team, a wild card team last year that I think will be even better this year. I think Bo Nix will take a step up as they have added some talent around him. On defense, they got even better in that underrated secondary, adding Jahdae Barron out of Texas to go with Pat Surtain. I know it's at home, and the Eagles normally don't get trapped, quote unquote, with this core. They don't really let that happen. They don't overlook teams, but I think the Broncos are a scrappy team with a really good defense, and after 4 tough games to start the season, I'll give the Broncos this win so the Eagles do drop to 3-2. But then I do think they get a win on the road against the Giants. They have New York's number. They have pretty much my entire lifetime. I still think at this point in the season, Russell Wilson will be starting for New York, right? At this point, it's only going to be week 6. I think it'll be Russell Wilson. If it was Jackson Dart, I think that it would be more competitive, but I think the Eagles take down the Giants. I actually have them beating New York both times here at home before the bye week. And I think they get a win on the road against Minnesota. J.J. McCarthy, I have no idea what to expect. Minnesota's a very talented football team. But I think the Eagles, after losing to Denver, go on a 3-game win streak heading into the bye. So they are now 6-2 after that bye week, defeating Dallas, Los Angeles, Tampa Bay, New York twice, and Minnesota. They have lost so far to the Chiefs and to the Broncos, both teams in the AFC West. So at the bye, they are 6-2. Here we go. On the road in Lambeau Field against the Green Bay Packers. I think they get another win against the Packers. The Packers, to me, have shown they're really soft this offseason. I hope they run the QB sneak or the tush push, whatever is allowed in this game. I hope the Eagles do it 10 times to score 10 touchdowns in the red zone. I think they take care of business. A tough game at Lambeau Field for sure. On Monday Night Football, a wild card round rematch of last year, but I do think the Eagles, fresh off a bye, will get another win and improve to 7-2. Against the Detroit Lions at home, I think this is going to be a back-and-forth battle between, I think, 2 of the best teams, maybe the 2 best teams, 2 of the top 3 teams in the NFC. I do think the Eagles finally get a loss after a 4-game win streak where they're absolutely on fire. I do think they lose this game, though, in a close one, and they go down to 7-3. And then a little bit of a trip up. They have a 2-game losing streak on the road against the Dallas Cowboys. Last year, they blew out the Cowboys when they were starting Cooper Rush, But normally things don't go well when Dak Prescott's starting for the Cowboys. The Eagles don't do well at Jerry World. I think they split with the Cowboys this year. I had them winning at home week 1. I'll say the Cowboys get even at Jerry World. So the Eagles fall to 7-4. But here's when they get back on track. Black Friday, home against the Bears. They get that win to get to 8-4. Then they have a nice break until the next Monday night against the Los Angeles Chargers. I think the Chargers are one of the most overrated teams in football. Justin Herbert is one of the most underrated, or I should say overrated quarterbacks in the NFL. The Eagles get a win again, and they improve to 9-4 on the season. And I think the winning continues. Some might think this is a trap game, but at home against the Vegas Raiders, the Eagles are just a superior football team. They need to stack wins at the end of this schedule to try to get that 1 seed. They'll take the win, and I think they get to 10-4 on the year. And then we finish things up with Commanders, Bills, Commanders. I think they split with Washington. So let's say 11-4, 11-5, and I think they beat the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo to get to 12-5. That's a huge win at the end of the year. I think they win some of these huge games and they lose some of them. I think they split between, like, you look at those massive matchups against the Rams, against the Chiefs, against the Packers, the Lions, and the Bills, and then the Commanders. Like, those 6 big-time matchups against contenders. I think the Eagles may probably split in those games. I think they take down the Bills at the end of the year. 12-5 is my prediction for the Philadelphia Eagles. Still, I think, a really solid year. Will it be enough to get the 1 seed in a competitive NFC? I'm not sure, but that's a tough schedule. And if you told me they were 13-4 this year and got one of those extra wins against Detroit or Dallas, I wouldn't be surprised, or maybe it's against Denver. But overall, trying to be objective, I think 12-5, considering this schedule, I'll take that. I think that's enough to win the NFC East. I think they'll win the division, and I think they'll be a top 2 seed again in the NFC conference, regardless of their record. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, what are some underrated storylines from this schedule that we're not talking about enough for the Eagles? We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, guys, today's show is sponsored by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night the NBA playoffs this year have been incredible. Every night is delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and to win big. The Timberwolves, they punched their ticket to the conference final. So did the Indiana Pacers in the East. The Knicks are up 3-2 on the Celtics. The Thunder up 3-2 on the Nuggets. I think I'll take the Thunder to get to the conference finals, but I'm not going to lie. I might go Celtics money line again to force a Game 7. I don't know. They looked good, even without Jason Tatum the other day. The way they were moving the ball, the way Jalen Brown was just playing such a complete game of basketball, the way Derek White was hitting threes. I don't know. They could force Game 7. I might take the Celtics money line on FanDuel. You can bet on whatever you want as well on FanDuel. It's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so the Philadelphia Eagles 2025 schedule was officially released last night at 8 o'clock. Got my complete schedule release show posted on all podcast platforms for you or on YouTube, so make sure you go check that out. Really appreciate you guys all tuning in. Today we did our win-loss predictions. I had the Eagles at 12-5 for 2025, but if you told me they were 13-4, I wouldn't be surprised. I think that's going to be their record. It's around 13-4, 12-5, could go one way or the other. Based on my predictions today, I'll lean towards 12-5. And maybe they won't be as lucky when it comes to injuries. I think their roster is a little weaker than it was last year, but overall, still 7 games over 500, still a division winner, and I think still a top 2 seed in the NFC this season. A lot of cool storylines for this schedule as well, and we talked about a lot of obvious ones yesterday. I'm circling the Tampa Bay game. I have a personal vendetta at this point against the Buccaneers. Obviously, it's going to be cool to see the Super Bowl celebration, making the Dallas Cowboys watch the Eagles hoist the Lombardi trophy, raise the banner in front of their fans. That's going to be incredible. I wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys don't even come out of the tunnel until after all of that's going on. The Chiefs Super Bowl rematch week 2 is going to be sweet. I think that Detroit game is going to be awesome on Sunday night. All the playoff rematches, the Buffalo Bills game for me is awesome. My whole family will be there with me in Buffalo for Eagles-Bills at the end of the year as I grew up in Buffalo, New York. So a lot of cool storylines. What are some underrated storylines, though, that I kind of took a liking to looking at this schedule? Well, here's one that people might forget is a low-key revenge game and means a lot to a lot of Eagles fans and some in that building from an emotional perspective. How about that Vegas Raiders game? You might think nothing of it, right? Maybe you think it's a trap game. It's a gimme game in between some really tough matchups, right? You got, the Chargers before it. You got the Commanders and Bills after it. You might just be looking ahead. But that game involves a very prominent figure in the history of the Philadelphia Eagles that kind of helped propel the Eagles into this golden era because of how bad he was at his job in 2015. An underrated storyline in 2025, the return of Chip Kelly. We have the Chip Kelly revenge game 10 years in the making. And this still means a lot to me. I know a lot of time has passed. I am 27 years old now. When the Eagles fired Chip Kelly, I was 17. Sorry to date my older Eagles fans there with how old I am. I do apologize for that. You're probably rolling your eyes, but it still means a lot to me. Even though they've won 2 Super Bowls since, they have made so many playoff runs. There's been so many different iterations of this Eagles team since that version of the Birds. That season made me hate football. I'm not kidding. That season made me not want to watch NFL football, and especially not Philadelphia Eagles football. There was nothing likable about that Eagles team. And now, I'm not naive. I hate when people say Chip Kelly broke up a should have been Super Bowl champion. Like, that's just not true. And when Deshaun Jackson says that, or LaShawn McCoy, I roll my eyes. You guys had 0 playoff wins in 4 to 5 years before that. Like, give me a break. But Chip Kelly did take away that version of the Eagles, and that was my Eagles growing up. Deshaun Jackson was my favorite player growing up. LaShawn McCoy was up there, Jeremy Maclin, and Michael Vick. And Chip Kelly just got rid of all of them and brought in all of these just boring, lackluster players. Sam Bradford and DeMarco Murray and Miles Austin, Kiko Alonso, Byron Maxwell, these mercenaries that didn't care about being Eagles, that weren't talented, they weren't fast, aesthetically pleasing, they looked awful in their jerseys. They didn't look right in the Eagles uniforms. It was just the worst year of Eagles football of my entire life. And I was a diehard Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson fan, and I went through the COVID 2020 year where they won 4 games and those guys got fired. And that was miserable, but it wasn't nearly as miserable as 2015. And the worst part was they were average. Like, they won 7 games that year. It was just a miserable, stuck in purgatory existence. And Chip Kelly made me hate football. So yeah, even though it's been 10 years, I want the Eagles to flaunt those Super Bowls in his face. I know he's only the offensive coordinator of the Raiders. He is probably so moved past all of that, but I'm not. And I hope Howie Roseman isn't either. I want him waiting out of the tunnel for Chip Kelly with both rings and being like, cap guy, huh? I'm just a cap guy. Remember, that's what you said. I'm just a cap guy. I want a cigar in his mouth. I want that scar of the beer can hitting him in the head back on his face. I want blood, basically, in that game. And I feel sorry, Raiders. Like, it's not your fault. But I want the Eagles to beat the Raiders that game by like 30 points. And I just want Chip Kelly to watch what Howie Roseman has built. Because Chip Kelly ruined Eagles football for me it was only a year, but it felt like a lifetime. And he exiled Howie Roseman to the other side of the NovaCare complex. And I want revenge on Chip Kelly. I really do. So that, at least for me, is an underrated storyline. It's the return of Chip Kelly 10 years later with the Las Vegas Raiders. Another underrated storyline is the playoff revenge games. I don't think a lot of people realize, I think we all know how tough the schedule is, but the NFL gave the Eagles all of the playoff teams that they beat last year in their Super Bowl run. So they play the Green Bay Packers Monday night. They play the Los Angeles Rams week 3. They take on the Washington Commanders week 16 and 18, and they take on the Kansas City Chiefs week 2. So they play every team that they beat in the playoffs last year. And Why does that matter? Well, I always say that it's not really revenge if a team that beat you in the playoffs, if you beat them in the regular season. Like in 2023, did the Eagles really get revenge on the Chiefs beating them in Arrowhead? Like, not really. It proved they can beat them, which helps for your confidence, your psyche. But a regular season win isn't the same as a playoff win or a Super Bowl win. So I don't think it really counts as revenge. So that part I kind of roll my eyes at. But why this is an underrated storyline is, number one, they're all just really tough matchups, and all those teams are going to be really good again in 2025. But also, those teams are going to be motivated. Those teams probably don't see it the way I do. They're going to want to get revenge. They're going to want get back on you. And you're going to get, not just with these teams, but this is what happens when you're a Super Bowl champion. You're going to get everybody's best every single week. Like, every team is going to be comparing themselves to you because you're the latest champion. You're one of the deepest rosters in football. Every team is going to, on this schedule, including the teams that you beat in the playoffs, that you broke their heart last year, you're going to get their best. And so that's going to be difficult, especially, again, when there's teams that want revenge from the 2024 playoffs. So for me, that's an underrated storyline. And then another one is just overall the trap games. I always try to look at which games are going to be more difficult than we think. When we're doing these win-loss predictions, which ones are we kind of overlooking? Like last year, I think the obvious one was the Carolina Panthers game, and that, in fact, was a trap game. The Panthers nearly beat you at the last second. You held on for dear life, but it did also cause some drama between A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts, and Brandon Graham. So I always kind of look at, all right, what games could be sneaky difficult based on the setup of the schedule? I think the Giants week 8 before the bye could be one, right? You're looking forward to the bye. You got some tough matchups after that with Green Bay and Detroit coming up. You played the Giants twice in 3 weeks. I think that one, you're coming back home as well from being on the road in Minnesota. I think that could be potentially a trap game. Maybe Jackson Dart's playing by then, so it's a new quarterback. I think that Denver game, not that they're a bad football team. They made the playoffs last year, so I think that's a trap, though, and I had them losing that game, actually, in my predictions, because, again, of the tough 4-game stretch that you start the season off with. Again, Dallas, Kansas City, Rams, Buccaneers. That's a tough first month. So coming home against Denver, that's an interesting one. And then the Raiders, because the Raiders are smashed in between some tough matchups with, you have that run of Green Bay, Detroit, Dallas, Chicago, and then LA. And then after the Raiders, you got Washington, Buffalo, Washington. So the Raiders are kind of sandwiched in between some tough stretches as well. So the Raiders, naturally, because they're one of the worst teams on your schedule, another potential trap game at the end of the season. So definitely always watching those as well, because you never know what happens in those games. Those aren't always as easy as they look. Another thing that I always like to look at for the schedule, quarterback matchups. Jalen Hurts has some tough matchups this year against star QBs. Which 3 am I circling the most for 2025? We'll get into that coming up next as we wrap up this Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles. All right, so what are the toughest quarterback matchups for Jalen Hurts in 2025? 2023, we had some barn burners. We had some beauties. He took on a lot of stars. Matt Stafford, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. I think even if they weren't stars, like he played, Dak Prescott and Tua Tagovailoa. Like that was a tough schedule. Baker Mayfield early on in the year. That was not an easy run for Jalen Hurts, but he ended up rolling through it and pretty much beating all of those star quarterbacks. So Jalen did really well last time he played a lot of stars in 2023. He beat Joe Burrow last year and Lamar Jackson. He beat Jaden Daniels in the playoffs and Matt Stafford and Jordan Love, Pat Mahomes. It's crazy, but Jalen Hurts it's not crazy. You should actually not be surprised anymore. Jalen Hurts has a really good track record against star quarterbacks. This year, he plays some really good ones again, looking at their 2025 schedule. Which 3 big-time matchups between Hurts and a star quarterback am I looking at the most? For me, it goes the Justin Herbert matchup, the Josh Allen matchup, and then the Dak Prescott matchup. Why? Different reasons for all 3. And I left out some of the better quarterbacks, like Matt Stafford, like, Patrick Mahomes, obviously. I think Jared Goff is a underrated quarterback in the NFL. Jaden Daniels is a rising star. So too could be Caleb Williams and, Jordan Love, maybe even Bo Nix. I think Baker Mayfield's extremely underrated, but I circled Herbert, Allen, and Dak for specific reasons. For Herbert, it's because, as I said earlier, I think Justin Herbert is the most overrated quarterback that gets a pass every year for, I think, personally, him underperforming every season, considering the talent that people are in love with. I know his support system hasn't always been as good as Jalen Hurts's, but if people say he is who they think he is as a top 5 quarterback that we can't question, and everybody just feels like pets his long hair on football Twitter, the results never matter with Justin Herbert. It's all about, film and aesthetic and his overall physical talents. The results don't matter. The BCS college football process back in the day would have loved Justin Herbert, right? I mean, it's the equivalent. Justin Herbert is the BCS of NFL quarterbacks, and I'm so sick of seeing him constantly ranked ahead of Jalen Hurts. Is Justin Herbert a more natural, gifted player than Hurts? Yes. Is he a better overall passer than Jalen Hurts? I believe so, but Jalen Hurts is a better football player. He is a better football player in between the numbers, and he is not treated like it. His playoff performances are so much better than Justin Herbert's. Justin Herbert's only been to the playoffs twice. They were in the same draft class. And it's just because Justin Herbert is what quarterbacks are supposed to look like. From a, arm talent perspective, mobility, he's tall, he's got the long hair and the arm sleeves, like he looks cool. The jerseys with the Chargers are beautiful. Like he is what people look for in a quarterback. And I do too. Like he has when you're building a quarterback in a lab, they tend to look like Justin Herbert for sure. But it doesn't matter. There's a lot of quarterbacks that have those kind of abilities that aren't better quarterbacks than players that aren't as naturally gifted or have different styles. Jalen Hurts is very naturally gifted, but it's in a different way than Justin Herbert. But it's treated as if because it's different, it's worse. Different doesn't mean worse. There are different ways you can be a good football player, a good quarterback. There are different ways you can be an elite quarterback. Jalen Hurts is more of an elite quarterback than Justin Herbert. I think Jalen Hurts is a top 5 quarterback. I don't think there is a real, responsible discussion you can have that puts Herbert in your top 5. And yet I think the majority of people still that aren't Eagles fans, and you can call us biased and homers, but I think the majority of people are wrong because the majority of football fans would still take Justin Herbert over Jalen Hurts. They would still say he's the better quarterback. So I want Jalen Hurts to go into LA and beat Justin Herbert, outplay him, throw the ball better than him, and take down the Chargers. I'm sick of seeing the consensus rankings have Herbert ahead of Jalen. I think Justin Herbert is the most overrated quarterback in the NFL, and I like him. I think he's a good quarterback. He's everything that I look for in a player. I do think his support systems at times have sucked, but I also think he is completely choked away now 2 different playoff games for LA. I don't think he has elevated his rosters as well as other players of supposedly his caliber that people put him in the same tier with, and I just think he gets way too much credit, and Jalen Hurts doesn't get enough, so that's why I'm circling that matchup. The other one is against Josh Allen, just because Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen are 2 of the most entertaining quarterbacks in football. And that 2023 shootout that went into overtime was an all-time classic. One of my favorite football games ever. Also because my brother's a diehard Bills fan. I got to watch the game with him. It was incredible. Jalen Hurts, if you don't think he can elevate and carry a football team or win in a shootout or win because he's throwing the football and make plays outside of structure, just go put on that tape. In the rain, Jalen Hurts put that team on his back when Josh Allen was torching the Eagles defense. So that was an all-time classic. A rematch. It could be a potential preview of Super Bowl 60. I thought it was going to be the matchup last year in the Super Bowl. So it could be a Super Bowl preview. That could be a really important game for seeding at the end of the year. A Week 17 matchup in Buffalo, a tough environment. That's going to be a really good test to see where the Eagles are at that point before the playoffs, to see where Jalen Hurts is against a fellow top 5 quarterback in the NFL. And then the other matchup is against Dak Prescott. The Eagles and the Cowboys have barely played each other with their quarterbacks healthy since 2020. Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott have only played against each other 3 times since 2020. Dak Prescott is 2-1 against Jalen, although the one win was against a terrible 2020 Eagles football team. Jalen was a rookie. It was the end of the year. They're 1-1 since then. That matchup is going to be really interesting because it is the season opener. And then it's an important game in the middle of the year as well in Dallas. I think the Cowboys, as much as I think they choke in the playoffs, they are going to be competitive for this division in the regular season if they are healthy. So I look at that matchup as well. And also it's very similar motivation-wise to why I put Justin Herbert on this list, because Dak Prescott is another guy that unjustifiably gets put ahead of Jalen in a lot of rankings because of just the gaudy regular season numbers he puts up. But Jalen Hurts is a better quarterback than Dak Prescott too. And I think there's a pretty even split between like football fans and media between who's better, Jalen and Dak, when I think it's fairly obvious that Hurts right now is the superior quarterback. Hasn't always been the case. It wasn't in 2020. It wasn't in 2021. But since 2022, I think it's pretty safe to say Jalen Hurts has been a better player than Dak Prescott. So that's kind of why I circled those two. I want Hurts to prove the country wrong about who he is compared to Justin Herbert and Dak Prescott. And then Josh Allen is one of the best quarterbacks in football, the reigning MVP. That's always an entertaining matchup. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. I'm going to sign off until tomorrow. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.